Miss Caroline.
Hello.
Hello. So thank you so much for taking your time with this interview. I'm very glad to have you here. And so today we're going to be talking about your book, Skating on Mars. And so yeah, so can you tell us a bit more about what inspired you to write the book and a bit more about you?
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course.
I wrote Skating on Mars during the pandemic when we were all trapped at home for a little while.
Yeah.
So I had a little more time than I normally do, and I had written before then. I had written a couple other books, but this book was really personal because it was about a character who was non-binary, like me,
Yeah.
and it was about an ice skater, and I was an ice skater, but I was nowhere near as good as Mars, and I wasn't as competitive. But it's something I've always loved. So I combined those things to write this story.
Yeah. So how did you come up with the name Mars?
For Mars's name.
Yeah.
So it sort of just came to me. Actually, the book title, Skating on Mars, came to me because there's a David Bowie song, and David Bowie is probably an artist you don't know that well, but he was a singer-songwriter, and he had a song called Life on Mars. So Skating on Mars is
Oh
kind of
yeah,
a
I
play
think
on
I've
that
heard that
song.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for me, the name Mars just sort of fit Mars. They get a
Yeah.
little angry sometimes.
Yeah, sort of like
Um,
the war god.
yeah, like the God of War.
Yeah,
And I think it just sort of felt like the right name for them. And it
yeah,
was
yeah,
funny because when I was writing the book, I ended up having this storyline about Mars's name that their parents gave them, which was Veronica. And then I had a play on that, which led them to the name Mars, but that came after I had, or they were Mars from the beginning. Everything else came later.
yeah. How did you come up with the character Jade?
Jade, I think, when we, or at least for me, when I would do activities like skating or soccer, or I did a lot of theater, I still do a lot of theater. But when I did those things, I always had these really intense friendships that grew out of them. And they were um, people that I'd only see in those spaces. So, when I'd play soccer, I'd only see this person when I was playing soccer. They'd be on another team, but I still kind of knew who they were and they knew who I was. So I was sort of growing on that idea of when we go into these different spaces in our life,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
come into contact with new people. And I think for Mars, what was really important was, and this happens with their skating coach too, Dimitri, a little bit, but it was important for them to meet new people because those new people were be able to reflect back who
yeah,
they are
yeah,
now. Our parents know us so well, but they know us from when we're a baby, and they have all their stories about us, and all of that builds up their knowledge of us. But sometimes it's a real gift to have someone show us who we are in this moment, because we've lived with ourselves all along too. So I think that was really important for Mars.
yeah. By the way, I really like your hair. I love the rainbow colors. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. And so are there any interesting, memorable experiences that happened in your life that you influenced in the book, other than skating and you being non-binary?
So the other, I guess, unfortunate thing that I have in common with Mars is that I had a parent die when I was young. I was a little older than Mars, but I went through that experience around their age. So this book, in a lot of ways, was me thinking about that process of grief, and um, really that keeps going for a long time. This book only takes place over 2 weeks and just a few months after Mars's dad has died. But I still have moments where I'm like, oh yeah, that's hitting me. So it was really kind of nice to be able to explore that. And the dedication in the book is to my mom. So that was a personal experience that's really connected to that. And then the other thing is I teach in a school that has 6th through 12th graders. So I'm around, young people all the time. We get to hear about their lives.
Yeah, it's awesome that you teach. So I'm so sorry to hear the incident. And so, can you tell us about your process of writing the book?
So I am a person who I like to smash together a lot of different ideas. So just like you were saying, I have this non-binary piece and I have this skating piece, and I'm like, oh, what would happen if I smash those together? I'll add some grief, I'll add some friendship. And then for me, I pretty quickly come up with like, well, what could that story be? And play around with just like, okay, so if I have this character and these conditions, where could that go? I try to come up with an outline, but sometimes my characters decide that they're going to do something different. And I try to let my characters lead sometimes because I'm
Yeah.
like, well, you're going somewhere more interesting than the prescribed plot points I had. And then I'll usually go back and be like, okay, how do I think about this from a writer perspective of telling that whole story? So
Uh,
I tend to, when I'm drafting, I tend to write really fast because I'm trying to hold all the different things in my head, and all those characters. But then it's in that editing process when I think it really starts
uh,
to crystallize and become something special.
yeah. Well, the thing about when you're drafting is you just have to get it out on a document or on paper because humans forget is the thing.
Yeah.
People
Oh
forget.
yeah. Well, it's so often too that I'll be editing and I'll go back and I'll be like, oh, I should add a line about this. And if I keep reading, I've already done that. I'm like, oh, you already, of course you did, because you wrote it in the first place. But I agree. I just have to get it all out there. I can make it better when I have the
Yeah.
words, but there's nothing as intimidating as a blank page.
Yeah. I also really don't like blank pages and because there's nothing on it. Like there's nothing there like that you've gotten done or
At
anything.
least if I have a name, Mars or something, then I can grow something from there.
Yeah. So how long did it take to write the book?
So I wrote Skating in Mars on Mars in about a month. That isn't how long it took to get it where it is now, but the first draft was about a month. And then I went through revisions,
Revisions,
um,
revisions,
and
revisions.
revisions with my agent, revisions with my editor. And, when you write a book, I mean, whenever we're writing, it's sometimes kind of lonely to write on our own,
Yeah.
but it's been so fun to be able to revise with a partner who's as invested as you are.
Yeah.
I do a lot of peer editing in my class, and I try really hard to get everyone as invested in that process. But I
Yeah.
think like having another person's perspective, another person be like, I think you think this makes sense, but it doesn't make sense to me when I read it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, that's important, because there's a point at which the book isn't just for me anymore. It's for everyone.
Yes, yeah. So you're saying sort of like your class is sort of like your mini critique group?
Yeah. Sometimes. I mean, I think I get a lot of inspiration from my class,
Yeah.
and I just get a lot of reminders about I think sometimes we forget how much emotional depth young people have, and how, you know, I teach ninth grade a lot right now. So
Uh-huh.
14 years old, 15 years old, and there's just like so much happening. And it's a good reminder, because sometimes we think like my adult life is way more complicated than my kid life. But really, kid life is pretty complicated.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Um, so what message or theme do you hope readers learn from the book?
Well, I hope different people take different things away from it. I certainly hope there's a group of people who feel really seen by this book. And I've talked to a few readers who really feel like, wow, this book is reflecting my experience or parts of my experience, whether that's with loss or gender or competitive sports or friendship.
Yeah,
But beyond that, I hope, I think one of the things that books can really do is help us cultivate empathy and understanding for other people.
yeah,
My parents uh, both brought my book and had their book groups read it. So these are like adults with grandchildren who read my book, and I was chatting with them, and they were like, Oh, I learned something by reading this book. I don't think I had thought through what it would feel like to be non-binary or how that might affect the way you go through the world. Um, and I was like, wow, that's a really great opportunity actually to like secretly teach parents and grandparents and adults in kids' lives about these experiences.
Yeah,
So, cultivating empathy, seeing yourself, and hopefully enjoying it. That's always like,
yeah, that's
I
well,
want people to read it and be like, wow, that went fast.
yeah, well, your book certainly made me feel a lot of empathy for Mars, and um it also made me like I've read other books about non-binary characters and people, and but I never like you said, like I never knew that things could happen. Like I mean, I never thought like which bathroom do they use, like where do they go, like and things like that. And like when there's men's and women's like sections, like there should be a they and them section.
Well, and like we should feel, when you go into Target or a store, you should feel like you can go to whichever section whenever. But there are
Yeah.
these, you know, confines or restrictions. And even though they're not, necessarily saying like you can't come in here, there are all these societal pressures. We feel, I mean, and I think kids feel that a lot. You're When I interact with my students, I'm reminded how much young people are really thinking about what the world is seeing and how the world is thinking about them.
Mm-hmm. So if you could give one piece of advice to yourself if you went back in time, what would it be?
That's hard. I think it would be to it's kind of conflicting advice because part of it is to jump out of my comfort zone more. That would be part of it. But then the other part is to like be comfortable with myself more. So jumping out of my comfort zone while being more comfortable with myself, which I think, I'm more comfortable jumping out of my comfort zone when I feel more secure in my own identity and feelings and emotions. So I think those two things go hand in hand, even though it feels like maybe they don't.
Yeah. Well, in a way, they sort of do. They sort of do go together. And so, if you could give one piece of advice to authors or people who want to become authors, what would it be?
Well, I think there are a couple things that you can do. One is read, 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 read. Just keep reading. Read things that you like, figure out why you like them. Maybe you don't have to finish the things you don't like, but thinking about why you don't like them, I think is really helpful. And then the
Yeah.
other thing that has really helped me as a writer is I did a lot of theater growing up and I do a lot of theater now.
Yeah, that's
And
nice.
that process of like trying on different characters, how do they stand? How do they act? How do they react to different people? What do they wear? I think that really helped me think and dialogue, that helped me think about dialogue because when you're in a play, you don't get to describe what's happening on the stage. It's usually that it's growing out of that dialogue and that
Yeah, it's just
conversation.
shown.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which actually gets a lot harder because I'm creative, but I'm not really good at making things look that well when I put it onto paper. Um,
But you have the ideas.
yeah, but if I just have somebody like create it for me, then things would be going good. But like that happens all the time. I have a vision for what to draw, opposite of what I want to draw. There's this
I
drawing
have that
for
problem, and I guess my advice to myself is draw more because I would love it if I were a talented artist. Like someday I would love to make a graphic novel, but I just like didn't work on it. I need to keep You need to keep working.
yeah. Well, I don't think there's any way I can ever be write or well draw a graphic novel because well, I mean I
Maybe
could if I really,
someday.
really, really, really try, but I don't think I'm gonna do that.
Yeah, it's a big project.
Yeah. And then plus, like you said, it's a graphic novel is sort of like a play. There's only dialogue and little labels here and there.
Yeah,
And
and
like,
creating the scene and the set. You read
yeah,
in a totally different way.
yeah. And so, what do you enjoy doing for fun other than skating, which you've already told us?
Well, I love to do theater. I love to watch reality television. So I like to watch the show Survivor. And I have a 7-year-old child, so I love hanging out with her. And I love walking my dog, Oscar. So those are a lot of my big things. I love reading. And yeah, I would say those are the big things.
Yeah. So are you planning to write any more books?
Yeah, so I have another book coming out in May called Linus and Etta Could Use a Win. And it's about two people in 8th grade who form an unlikely friendship. So that one's
Yeah.
coming out in about 2 months. And then I have another book coming out next year called Piper Goes Overboard, which is about a kid, Piper, who decides that Z wants to break up their mom and her girlfriend. So they all go on a cruise together, and it's sort of like creating situations where people won't be having much fun, which is actually so much fun to write. So yeah, I just keep writing. I'm writing a lot, and hopefully there'll be even more books.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there will be. Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for your time with this interview. I really enjoyed um what we did today. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.